Ajnanatimirandasya Dhyananjana Shalakaya Chakshunamanitam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaye Tedalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Yam Pravajantam Anupeta Apeta Krityam Rapayano Viraha Katara Ajuhava Putreti Tanmaitaya Tadavo Binedus Tam Savabhutam Hridayam Unimanatosmi Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatam Vyasam Tato Jaya Mudirayat Abhaktya Vihina Padara Lakshay Kiptastakamari Tarangamadye Kripa Maitam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charanarvindam Tavevasmi Najivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigyaya Radhe Tvam Nayanam Charanandike Vancha Kalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, we'll continue hearing the glories of Srila Haridas Thakur, Namacharya Haridas Thakur, whose disappearance day was yesterday. But before that, we have to state that this is the day of the Visvarupa Mahotsava, where Mahaprabhu had been traveling throughout South India on the pretext of finding his brother Visvarupa. Although he knew internally that Visvarupa had already left, because once Nityananda Prabhu met with Mahaprabhu, Visvarupa merged back in, because Visvarupa is an expansion of Nityananda Prabhu. They're both his eternal brothers, so Visvarupa was with him in that way. But when he found out that his brother had left this world, I think his sannyas name was Shankarananda, right? Then he did a special kind of Shraddha ceremony for him, and even though it's Chaturmasya, because of that, he shaved his head. So we get to shave our head today. Thank goodness. And it's... Any rate, so it's also the day that was chosen by Srila Bhakti Brighan Kesha Goswami Maharaj to take sannyas. He received sannyas from Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj. And then, years later, our Srila Prabhupada took sannyas on this same day in Mathura from Bhakti Brighan Kesha Maharaj. It's very interesting how they explain this, because originally he had wanted to take sannyas from Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. They had a very close relationship, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he considered him to be like his main, like, Shiksha Guru. He says that my Srila Prabhupada, he's talking about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, liked him to prepare me for preaching in the West, because Srila Sridhar Maharaj was so knowledgeable about Western philosophy and Western religious conceptions. So they would discuss for long periods of time these concepts and how to explain them to Westerners, right? How to introduce and explain Krishna consciousness to Westerners. Srila Prabhupada had some background himself, having gone to university at Scottish College, but Srila Sridhar Maharaj is particularly expert in all of that. So he wanted to take sannyas from Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, but Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj said that, I stayed at your house for some time, and I have a very close relationship with your whole family. And so because of that, if I give you sannyas, they may feel more free to criticize me. Sometimes intimacy in a relationship makes you more free with talk, praise, and criticism, right? The maryad, or the distance, that one might feel if one doesn't know somebody, they might be more considerate. But if you know somebody, you might speak more freely about about your anger towards them, right? How could he do this? He knows our family, right? Oh, and they would incur some fault. So he said, best that I not give you sannyas. However, our dear friend, Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, they were also very close. He received the mantra from me. I received it from Srila Prabhupada. He received it from me. That mantra is there. So they had that confidence in one another. And so he took from Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj in Mathura at the Keshavji Gaudiya Mat there. And Srila Prabhupada described the ceremony himself, that on that day, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj did the fire sacrifice and also gave him his cloth and showed him, how to use it and everything. And then after the ceremony, then Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj would install the danda. What happens after you take sannyas and you're given your danda by your sannyas guru, right? And the danda is empowered. The danda is like an incarnation of Baladev. And Srila Prabhupada, on the occasion of the disappearance of Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, he talked somewhat about that. And he always considered that Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj gave him a great mercy by giving him sannyas. He spoke this in Seattle. And the lecture is still there. It's in the folio, when he had heard the news. And my god sister Govinda Dasi told me some more details about that, which were pretty interesting, because she was there. And in the lecture, Srila Prabhupada instructs one devotee, you have a pencil, write this down, write this letter of condolence, and have all the devotees sign it, and I'm going to send it to I think he was in Navadvip at that time when he disappeared, right? And she was the one with the pencil. She was acting like a secretary at that time. But Srila Prabhupada said that he never wanted to take sannyas, which is understandable. I mean, sannyas, it can complicate your life. It can simplify your life, but also complicates your life. So, but he said his Guru Maharaj kept coming to him in a dream that you must take sannyas. And of course, in his humility, he said, I was afraid of sannyas. I didn't want it. In fact, he describes that after he'd received his initiation back in 1932, a verse from the Bhagavatam to Maharaj Yudhishthira. Maharaj Yudhishthira was questioning why the devotees of Vishnu often appear impoverished, whereas the devotees of Lord Shiva always seem to be very wealthy. Shiva is a devotee of Vishnu, so why are the devotees of Vishnu impoverished? And the answer, and the verse begins with Yasyaham Anugrahaya, that Vishnu himself says, when I particularly favor someone, I take away everything. Because then they have no more shelter but me. And furthermore, all those who were attached to him, like family members and others, then they no longer want him around. Oh, what good are you? You're useless. Go away. They lose faith in that person. And the relationship is more easily broken, right? Because at some point you have to realize relationships can be broken anyway. Every relationship is broken by time. No matter how attached and how loving you are, it's going to be ended at one time. And we've had so many husbands, we've been wives, we've been husbands, we've been children, we've been grandparents. We can't remember any of them. Oh, you might have a dream sometime where you can have a dream with somebody and remember it from some past life, but mostly it's all forgotten. One dear god sister once confided in Srila Gurudev, her husband had left you could say prematurely, many years back. And she said, I still miss him so much. And Gurudev said, he's forgotten you entirely, you know. So you can now forget him, you know, and move on. Because ultimately, these relationships are just reflections, imperfect reflections of the relationships we want to have with Krishna and all the Brajbasis, right? So ultimately, whatever we're doing in this world, whether we remain brahmachari, whether we become married, vanapras, sannyas, it's meant to train us in the disciplines of bhakti so that we can establish that soul relationship. Every relationship becomes real once we have a relationship with Krishna. Otherwise, they're illusory. What we think is relationship is a temporary, illusory thing. That's not to say that as devotees we can't have affection for other devotees. In fact, we should, but on what basis? Why do we show affection to others? Because of their relationship with our gurus or our Guru Varga. And that's a very important consideration that we should consider, because usually we take all the habits of our worldly relationships and apply them in our devotional life. And so in devotional life, we have friends and we have enemies. And if anybody displeases us in any way, we criticize them, we find fault, oh, this person's like this person's like that. But what is the value of that when discussing other devotees? A much healthier and beneficial mindset, which is the mindset of our gurus, is to detect the Vaishnavata to whatever degree that exists. You notice that and you focus on that, and that becomes the basis of your relationship. That becomes the basis of appreciation. We're not trying to cultivate relationships based on how much good there is versus how much bad there is, according to our estimation. No, we want to find whatever degree of bhakti may be awakening. The whole purpose of guru, and actually we'll come back to this, the whole purpose of sannyas is to empower preaching. And preaching means to plant the seeds of bhakti and then fan those flames or water that seed, whatever metaphor you want to use, so that bhakti will grow. I know that was one of the things that struck me particularly about our dealings with Srila Narayan Maharaj, because we didn't get so much, if any, real direct personal association with Srila Prabhupada. And even if we had, we were so young and experienced, how much would we have understood? At least me, right? But when we met Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, we were much older and had so much more to reflect on. And even though we weren't practicing any bhakti hardly at all at that time when we met him, any meeting we had or any dealing, he would always acknowledge and praise whatever service that he saw you doing, or that he saw that you would do in the future, right? That he knew immediately the heart of everyone and could see, all right, they're like this now, but they're going to grow more and more and more. There was one incident that he had in Florida when he was doing a program, I guess it was in Alachua at the time, and many old, Prabhupada disciples were there. It was maybe around 2000 or something, maybe late 90s, I can't remember the date. And one godbrother, controversial godbrother, had come, Kirtananda Maharaj, and, he had a history. There were many things under his watch that were done and under his direction that had caused a lot of pain to a lot of devotees, say that frankly. But Gurudev knew him from when Srila Prabhupada first went back to India, like in 1967. He took Kirtananda with him. And they developed a relationship. And he saw Kirtananda serving so nicely at that time, cooking for Srila Prabhupada. And Gurudev was always very affectionate to the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. And so, even though so much had happened and they hadn't seen each other for so long, Srila Gurudev saw him at the program. He came to the program to see Gurudev. He was in a wheelchair by this time, and he wasn't going to stay much longer in this world. But after the program, Gurudev went over, and even though he was in a wheelchair, he bent down and hugged him, right? And many of the devotees, of course, in that assembly, they didn't want anything to do with him, with Kirtananda Maharaj. But Gurudev, he embraced him very warmly. And one other godbrother told Gurudev, "Oh, why have you hugged him? Don't you know who he is, what he's done?" And Gurudev said, "Yes, I know what he's done for the past 10,000 lives, right? And I also know what you've done for the past 10,000 of your lives, and what you will do in the future." And this goes to the point we were talking about what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says about these great Mahabhagavats. They are fully empowered with Bhakti Shakti, and particularly Karuna Shakti, the quality of compassion. And they are here to distribute it practically without consideration. They're the agents of Mahaprabhu, right? And they want to give this love freely because Mahaprabhu, Radha and Krishna, they want us all back. And so Gurudev would do that everywhere. And he did this with me many, many times. You know, there were situations. And he would speak so lovingly and fondly, even though I knew at that time I was doing nothing. I'm doing nothing now. But it struck me that oftentimes in our dealings with, our peers, we hear about what we're not doing or our inadequacies. But he would point out what we were doing. And what is that? In business management psychology, they call it positive reinforcement. That anybody can find what somebody's not doing right, and you can point that out. Chastise, you're bogus, rah, rah, rah. And we had a lot of so-called leaders that was their expertise, to chastise, give you the hot sauce, or whatever they called it, right? But they found that people respond so much better when you tell them, "Oh, you've done so nicely." And they just want to do that again and again because that's acknowledged, that's praised. Everybody wants to be accepted and appreciated for what they do. And so if you point out the good things, then they're going to act like that. They're going to come up and be their highest and best self. And that works in bhakti as well. Right? So we should consider that. We shouldn't be walking around showing everybody all the problems. That usually doesn't work. It creates a distance between you and the others. You may have a senior relationship with somebody where you can do it, but Gurudev also had that. And he saved chastisement for devotees who could take it and appreciate it. There's a nice little book called Affection and Reproach by Letters of Bhaktivedanta Maharaj. And in the introduction, he describes that Guru has two ways of dealing. One is chastisement and one is praise. And most of us only want to hear the praise. But if Gurudev is very affectionate to you, he'll also give you chastisement, which will remove anarthas that praise will not. And so if you can embrace both forms of correction, then you're very fortunate. But that's Guru, right? He's empowered and expert. We're not so expert in that. And so if you're going to try to point something out to somebody, it should be done, that you think is wrong. First of all, is it true, right? Does it have any value, right, when you say that? Do you think they're going to listen to you and respond favorably, right? Otherwise, what's the point? Just that you've made your point? No. It says, Palena Parachiyate, it says in Chaitanya Charitamrita, you judge by the result. So Gurudev would always do that. And fortunately, sometimes later on, Gurudev always treated me with kid gloves because he knew how tender and delicate I was to chastisement. Having gone through a lot of that in ISKCON, I rebelled against it. So he's always being really nice. But then later on, he gave me a little direction sometimes. But always I could understand that it was done with the most affection, right? And so you have to be able to take it. And Srila Prabhupada once tells a story about how he was in a assembly, and his Guru Maharaj was lecturing, and one man next to him couldn't understand what Srila Saraswati Prabhupada was saying, and he asked Srila Prabhupada to explain it. So Srila Prabhupada was whispering and explaining. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada stopped and pointed to him. Oh, you know everything so well? You don't have to hear? And Srila Prabhupada later said, oh, this is my greatest moment, right? The best time of my life, my Guru Maharaj chastised me. He loved it. He loved it. But we're not the Guru, are we? Right? So Srila Prabhupada said that his Guru would come to him in his dreams and say, you must take sannyas. He explained this in his speech in Seattle, where he, after hearing the news of Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj's disappearance. And Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, they had this tendency, this lion-like quality. They shared this disposition where they would speak very strongly. And Srila Prabhupada would speak very strongly about his godbrothers as well. And he admits later it didn't always go over very well, that why is he speaking like this to us? And one time he wrote an article, very scathing article, about what had happened in the Gaudiya Math and how one group had just seized all the properties, put their godbrothers in jail, done so many things, and then sold the printing presses, one thing after another. All the history of the Gaudiya Math was there, right? The family history. And they were going to print it in the Gaudiya Patrika, their monthly magazine that Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj started, and Srila Prabhupada was like editor-in-chief. But they sent it out to the senior godbrothers first as a courtesy. And they all wrote back, oh, you should not write this. This is our family business. We can speak like this amongst ourselves, but we should not speak like this in public. Right? And Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, they thought that very humorous. And they knew they'd stirred the hornet's nest. And they were thinking, should we publish or not publish? And then they would laugh. Right? But then Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj came, because he was, very senior. He had been given sannyas by Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, and the title Bhakti Rakshak, right, the guardian of devotion, and he was respected by all, and especially by Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, because he was his sannyas guru, and by Srila Prabhupada, who accepted him as his shiksha guru, and they also their dear friend, and also had a reputation for unbiased judgment or consideration on any matter, and eminently diplomatic, and also expert in scripture to explain it from that position. So he recommended that they not publish for all these different reasons, and then they accepted it. Right? But they had that nature. So Srila Prabhupada, when he got that dream, he says in this lecture in Seattle that I was afraid to take sannyas. He says, but my godbrother, and he meant Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, he forced me. He forced me. And he also explains elsewhere that also Srila Narayan Maharaj also encouraged him, because when Srila Prabhupada moved to Vrindavan, he first stayed in Mathura for some time with Srila Narayan Maharaj, and they had many conversations. And when he went to Vrindavan and stayed at Radha Damodar, Srila Narayan Maharaj would visit him, and they would spend time together and talk many things. And Srila Narayan Maharaj would say, now you've left your household. You are engaged full-time in publishing work, preparing for your mission to go to the West. You should take sannyas. And Srila Prabhupada was a little reluctant, but this continued, and not because of attachment. One of the reasons you might be reluctant is because sannyas also requires that people offer you respects, They want to touch your toes. And some people say, I don't want that. That's an obstacle to my devotion. I want to be in the background. I want to be unknown. I want to do my service, but I don't want any respect. When you're in the garb of a sannyasi, the maryad or the etiquette is that people offer that to you. You know, I remember. I think I've told this story. I went to China a few times, and was going all over the place. Right, we went all over China. And one time I had to stay extra because I couldn't get a return visa because there'd been a terrorist attack in India, and they wouldn't let anybody come back. When a bunch of Pakistanis shot up a hotel in Bombay. So I had to stay extra long. So I stayed in China a long time. And the Chinese devotees, they're very humble, and they are just always trying to serve you. And I think the culture is like that anyway. So stayed there, and every day from morning to night, you know, they serve you, they praise you, they feed you. And if you walk somewhere, there's a whole bunch of them. Immediately they jump aside, you know, and form two lines, and you walk between them, right? This is going on for like months. And then finally I get back, and I get back to the ashram, right? And there's all the boys there, Indians, Westerners, all over, you know, from all over. And then I got to go to my little room, and I got to pass through this big pile of brahmacharis. You know, they're all glad to see me, but it wasn't like such a big deal, you know. And I walked towards my room, towards the crowd, and they didn't jump aside. And I went, what? You know, and I had to stop it and walk around them. And my mind said, hey, why don't they all jump aside? You know, don't they know who I am? My mind said that. And then I immediately started laughing. You know, yeah, they know who I am. That's why they didn't jump aside. Why would they? But I laughed, and I realized you have to be very careful when you're in an environment where you're offered respect. It's the most subtle and dangerous anartha. It will erode and undermine everything else. Raghunath Das says, even when you have conquered lust, anger, greed, and these other gross attachments of the body and the mind, pratishtha, the desire for pratishtha, for reputation, for acknowledgement, for praise, this remains in the heart. Right? So you have to be very, very careful. So, you know, I can only think that if Srila Prabhupada didn't want sannyasa, it wasn't because of any fear. He was higher than any sannyasa. He was Paramahamsa. As his devotional status, but being very humble. But it was also explained that sannyas, Srila Narayana Maharaj said that, and Srila Prabhupada said that in a speech. Sannyas empowered me to preach in another way. In India, it's very obvious how it empowers you because people give you respect. They'll honor you and hear what you have to say. So it has advantage there. And for preaching, you can serve others because if they serve you, according to the etiquette of the culture, and you are transparent and just passing it on to your guru, and through the parampara, you're very careful not to accept it on your own behalf, then they get benefit. So your serving is that via media, right? But the danger is that you will accept that praise and money or whatever else they're giving on your own behalf, right? There's a story that Srila Narayana Maharaj tells about when he and another godbrother, Bhakti Gankeshwar Maharaj, senior, had been sent out to preach, and they'd been gone for some time, a month or so or whatever, and when they came back, Srila Narayana Maharaj went and gave Bhakti Gankeshwar Maharaj the money. And he said, how was the preaching? So very well, we collected this amount of rupees, which was substantial. And Bhakti Gankeshwar Maharaj, and there was like 50 rupees less. And the other sannyasi, as was often done, had kept some for expenses. He wasn't an enjoyer, but he kept some for expenses, which many, many did. But then Bhaktivedanta Keshavaraj called him and said, have you kept any funds? And he said, yes, I kept 50 rupees for personal expenses. He said, give it to me. And the sannyasi was upset. What? You know, as if he was being challenged, or why did you keep it? You're greedy, whatever he was thinking. And he said, what? We can't keep for personal expenses? You know, he's always done that. And he said, just give me. And he gave it to him. Bhaktivedanta Keshavaraj took it in his hand and then touched it like this, blessed it, and then gave it back to him. And he said, the money that you take from materialistic people has all of their karma and sin. And when you take donations, you have to be very careful. Can you digest that, right, or not? So he didn't take it back to keep it or to make this person know he's subservient. He took it back to protect that devotee and to purify the donation. So that's also in our life when we live in a devotional community, the degree to which we are living in harmony, in integrity, is how much we're using everything we receive in the service of our Guru Varga. And so our community is built for the service of the mission of our Guru Varga, right? And so everything is theirs, and they're letting us use it. That should be our vision. And then when we are dealing with others, back to that other point, that we should detect only the good. How much, oh, they're doing this nice service, they're doing that nice service. Don't let yourself be bothered by the rest of it, right? If you want to cast a critical eye, turn it around and cast it into your own heart. That's the best use of it, right? To acknowledge and examine one's own fault. Otherwise, Gramya Kata will just drag you down. Because whatever you detect in others and talk about it, that fault is attracted to your heart. You're making a place in your heart for that defect and allowing it to come in. And any material defect will reflect on our bhakti. So Srila Prabhupada, on the encouragement of Bhaktivedanta Keshavaraj and Srila Narayan Maharaj, he took that sannyas. And that day, Srila Narayan Maharaj was giving the fire sacrifice. And another dear godbrother, oh man, the one who always chanting, Krishna Das Babaji. Thank you. Very well-wisher of everyone. Very friendly with ISKCON devotees in later years as well. Wonderful, wonderful devotee, but he spent his entire time chanting everywhere. And he came to the fire sacrifice. And the sacrifice was very elaborate, more elaborate than what we do now, many more activities. And it took many, many hours. And Krishnadas Babaji was chanting, right, singing during that time. And Srila Prabhupada asked him to simply chant the Mahamantra. Not all the other bhajans and everything, just chant the Mahamantra, which he did. And if you've ever heard him chant, I mean, obviously because he's a great pure devotee, his chanting is filled with so much spiritual emotion. But even people like me can detect such a depth and a love in his chanting, and it's very sweet and wonderful to hear. And then he was given cloth and everything, given his danda. And then it's traditional that you give a speech. And even though all the audience was from Bengal and from Mathura, Rajbasis, they're all Bengali and Hindi-speaking people, for the most part, he gave his lecture in English. And the reason he gave it in English was because he took this to be the, how would you say it, the confirmation and empowerment for the mission that his Guru Maharaj had given him from the very first time they met in 1921. You're an educated young man, you should preach this message to the English world. And the last letter that he received, and the last instruction he received from his Guru Maharaj was, now you should preach this to the Western world. Right? And that had been reinforced at different times over the years. And then in the message to take sannyas, that same message was there. And so Srila Prabhupada said in a speech, by the mercy of this my godbrother, and he said, not my godbrother, actually by my Guru Maharaj, his mercy, I have taken sannyas to be empowered to preach. It was by that action of taking sannyas, the mercy of my Guru Maharaj. But he mentioned his godbrother, and the way he said it was actually a very high form of praise, because if he had said the mercy of my godbrother alone, that would have been great praise. But by saying it was the mercy of my Guru Maharaj through my godbrother, he was acknowledging the fact that he saw in his own godbrother all the qualities, all the mercy, and all the transparency, a fully empowered representative of his Guru. And this is who he took sannyas from. And he wrote a beautiful Sanskrit poem that mimicked a poem about Sanatana Goswami. I don't have it in front of me. I should have gotten that. I couldn't remember. It was like, Vairagya Yug Bhakti Sampayatnaya Apayaya Mam Anabhipshamandum Kripam Budirya Padaduka Duki Sri Keshava something, I can't remember the last line, but just like Raghunath Das writes a beautiful poem in praise of Sanatana Goswami, who made him, even though he was unwilling, made him drink the nectar of renunciation, right? So, even though he was unwilling, right? He wrote that same poem with some alteration about Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj. And then he spoke this. It was in 1968 in Seattle. And as I say, Govinda Dasi told me something. You can read the transcript of that. And, I think there might be a tape of that also. It might have been recorded. I can't remember. I don't know that I've heard the tape. But she said something else. She said that you may not be able to hear it or recognize it on the transcript, but she said that she was sitting right in front of Srila Prabhupada. And she said the whole time he was speaking this lecture, tears were pouring down his face, uncontrollably, like rivers of tears when he was remembering his godbrother. And that is so significant. This is the kind of affection that pure devotees have for one another. When you love Krishna, you love his associates, and you love them for what? Because they're also making Radha and Krishna happy. In our case, as Palyadasis, they're serving Srimati Radhika so happy, so whenever you think of them, you're thinking of them and how much love they have for your most beloved. Right? Srila Prabhupada used to say, love me, love my dog. Right? If you love somebody's dog, those people will like you. But you may be a great person, and there may be another great person, but if they're walking their dog and you kick their dog, they're not going to be very favorable to you. So we're Krishna's dogs, we're Radhika's dogs, but if you have love for them, you're going to naturally love those who are dear to them. Right? Now, I'm not saying our gurus are dogs, but they have that humorous analogy of, that a dog is like, Chanakya Pandit said, he would talk about different animals and their qualities, and he said, the loyalty of a dog. A dog is so loyal, and Srila Prabhupada said this also, that they will give their life for their master. Even their master might not be a good person. They'll give their life. Right? So, Srila Prabhupada had so much love for his godbrother, who was his deep friend and also his sannyas guru. But on that level, just like with Sridhar Maharaj, he called him a shiksha guru, but it's a different kind of guru. It's a teacher, but a teacher in intimacy, in deep, deep friendship. It's like the Sakis. Some are superior, some are group leaders, but they have this intimacy of friendship. It's not like in our hierarchy of rule with formality and all. They're showing each other things out of happiness and love. Right? And it's called Vishrambena Guru Seva, right? Where you have so much affection for that person. You see in them all these wonderful qualities, and you're imbibing and sharing those same qualities. So whatever is dear to that person is also dear to you, right? So that kind of service to Guru. There's no higher and lower. It's done out of love. And this was Srila Prabhupada's acknowledgement and speech about his godbrother. And he wrote the poem and the letter of condolence and sent it to Navadvip, to our Trivikram Raj, to Bhaktivedanta Vama Goswami Raj, and to our Srila Gurudev, Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Raj, because he had a relationship with them as well. Right? So that was his sannyas day that he took from Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, and there is a picture, and he's standing on one side, and his godbrother, Muni Maharaj, who was like 90-something years old, he was living as a brahmachari in the temple, and when he heard, oh, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, because he already had the name Bhaktivedanta given to him earlier by another, I think was it Bhakti Ayava? Or Bhakti Vivek Bharati? One of his really senior sannyasi godbrothers, recognizing his learning, had given him that title back in the late 40s. And so when he was given sannyas, Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, he had already known about that title. They were very close. And he had given his first three sannyasi disciples that same title, Bhaktivedanta. It's a very important, exalted title, right? One who is steeped and learned in all the tattva and all the truths and all the emotions of bhakti. And he just reaffirmed it. Oh yes, you are Bhaktivedanta. Right? And then Srila Prabhupada, he kept also the Abhayacharana of India. Normally when you take sannyas, you're no longer referred to by your brahmachari name. Right? And you take, his sannyas name was Swami, Bhaktivedanta Swami. That's one of the 108 sannyas names, and it's one of the principal names as well that the Shankaracharyas would use. So he had that, but he always kept Abhayacharana of India. He would abbreviate it as AC. And sometimes Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj would tease him, why are you doing that? You're a sannyasi now. But the reason he did it, he said, is because when Mahaprabhu took sannyas, he kept his brahmachari name, Krishna Chaitanya, right? To acknowledge his relationship with his beloved guru. He wasn't giving that up. Krishna Chaitanya from Visvarupa. And so our Srila Prabhupada, in that same mood, was saying, yes, I'm sannyasi, but I'm also the eternal servant of my Guru Maharaj. Right? And so when I was going to take sannyas, Gurudev wanted to give me the name Janardhan for the same reason. And that's one of the sannyas names. But just the year before, one really nice devotee had been given that name as a sannyasi. From Navadvip in the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti. And so he said, oh, we already gave it out. So then he picked this other name, which was nice. So, but also, a lot of my godbrothers would call me Janardhan, right? I'm fine with that, however what the relationship is. And I know that Srila Prabhupada, I read one transcript of a conversation between him and Bhaktivedanta Sridhar Maharaj, And they were talking about Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj. He had already left this world, and Srila Prabhupada called him Vinod Bhai. Vinod was his brahmachari name. And that's how they had known each other for so many years. And Bhai means brother, right? Vinod Bhai. Oh, our brother Vinod. They talked to him about like that, right? So this was his day of sannyas. And then he went with renewed vigor to continue his translation, and determined he wanted to complete at least the first canto of the Bhagavatam, and he had some other books. And then he was going to go, and it took some great effort, but he finally made it in 1965. There are stories of him, after he'd taken sannyas, that he would do madhukari, living in Radha Damodar. He wasn't eating from the temple. He would go and beg a little flour or whatever, some vegetables, and he would cook in his own room, little room. And sometimes he would go down to the bank of the Jamuna, and there in a sandy place, he would put his danda in the ground and then chant beautiful songs like Hari Haraya Nama Krishna, Yadavaya Namaha, chanted by Mahaprabhu, and circumambulate the danda and chant in ecstasy. Right? And many of the pictures, even though he left his danda in India, I believe it was left in India, because he didn't have it generally when he's traveling, because airline baggage restrictions, they wreck it. But he would take many formal portraits with somebody else's danda, right? And so for some time here, we had a danda on one side with Srila Gurudev, another side with Srila Prabhupada. I had my danda there, but now they're all over there. So, so I took this sannyas from Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, but in the same way that he felt that he was being given sannyas, Srila Prabhupada, by the order of his Gurudev, by his Guru Maharaj, I thought Srila Narayan Maharaj was fulfilling that same role, right? That he never thought, it's definitely my sannyas guru, no doubt about it, and Shiksha guru. But there are some synchronicities, because generally when we took sannyas in our line, we'd always do it in Navadvip, right? At the time of Gaur Purnima. But in 2004, when I took sannyas, we didn't go to Navadvip that year. They had split with the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti, just like Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj and others had separated themselves from the devotees that claimed the title of Gaudiya Mat and then started their individual institutions. They followed the principles of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada and his real Manubhishta, but they were separated from the institution. So we were separated, and we stayed in Vrindavan that year, and because we had no place to go in Navadvip, separate place. And then Srila Narayan Maharaj said, I'd always wanted to at least spend one time for Gaur Purnima in Vrindavan. So we spent it there. And when the sannyas ceremony took place, I was thinking, this is kind of wonderful. Srila Narayan Maharaj did the ceremony for Srila Prabhupada, and he's ordering me to take sannyas, and he was observing the ceremony, sitting there. He didn't do the yajna, but he was sitting there. And I told you about the picture of Muni Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada. One other devotee, Indian devotee, he wanted the name Puri because he was from Puri, but that had already been taken. So the day of the festival, Gurudev changed it to Muni Maharaj, and I was sitting next to him. And I thought, okay. I'm sitting next to Muni Maharaj, just like Srila Prabhupada was, and I'm in Vrindavan, just like Srila Prabhupada was, and Narayan Maharaj is overseeing it, just like with Srila Prabhupada. So the continuity and the synchronicity was there. So whatever Acharya does, we try to study it and emulate it, and remember their mood and the spirit with which they do things, because everything they do is a teaching example. So this is the day of Visvarupa Mahotsava, where Mahaprabhu glorified and did a yajna for his own brother, shaved his head, right? And this is also the day that both Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj and our Srila Prabhupada took sannyas, so we can remember all the specialities of that and try to imbibe those teachings in our own life. So we glorify our Srila Prabhupada, glorify Srila Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, our Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all the assembled devotees, Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. See if this saves.